Let us play. We're in a cycle of looking at the myths of Plato. The conclusion to Plato's Republic is a myth, as he does in other dialogues. The Phaedo, which we just went through, that's also a concluding myth, concluding in the dialogue. And here we have the myth of concludes Plato's Republic. Now, rather curious myth. And we're going to see whether we can play with it, make sense of it. So then, let's start. Myth is telling us something significant. We have to discover its significance. It takes a reflection. It takes an examination. Now first, who's was a warrior. And he fought, and of course he was wounded on the battlefield, and he was left for dead. 10 days after the battle, they collected the decaying corpses and put them on a pyre to burn them. And much to people who were collecting them surprise, Ur's body was still intact. They were going to burn it on the 12th day, and there he woke up. He rose on the funeral pyre on the 12th day, and he said, "Excuse me, don't use a match." And he related this myth. Myth is therefore an account of the other world, because his soul left his body during that period of time, and he traveled into the next world, and this is the myth. So after 10 days, nice point up there. I'll talk about it in a minute, even though it's hidden. After 10 days then, they collected the bodies, they put them on the funeral pile on the 12th. He stopped the burning, got off, and said, "I have been told to give ear and to observe everything, because I just visited the other world, and I've been told to come and return to give mankind the account of the next world." That's the myth of First thing he says is that after death, people come together to be judged. And there's two openings in the heaven, and two openings going down below to Hades. They come before these judges, and there are four things, of course, that go on here. First, those that are just go up into the heavens. The unjust go down. Equally well, coming back, those that have been clean and pure return now to be reincarnated. And so they return to the next world, our world. Equally well, coming up from Hades are those who've lived in squalor and suffering, and they're covered with dirt, and they enter into this arena to be judged once more. And this is the judgment. The whole myth is about the judgment. Now, for those people who are clean and pure and coming down to be reincarnated, and those coming up who've paid their penalties up from the underworld, they come together and they have discussions and they reflect upon their experiences. This is called the journey to the meadow. And they stay there for several days, and they discuss with one another, and they talk about people they knew and what's happened to them. And so they give all kinds of accounts of their journeys, both from heaven and from Hades. They have a great exchange. The ones from heaven talk about the visions of beauty and the delights they experienced. The others talk about the wailing and the suffering, and they lament over everything they went through. But now they're together and they're reflecting on this. The first thing they bring up is the judgment that took place. For each and every wrong, there's a tenfold penalty of 100 years. For each kindness and act of being just, the same measure is given for those going into the higher world, the heavens. And so that's the way in which the judgment is decided. 10 times same measure for each wrong, 10 times the measure for each act of kindness and being just, and that accounts for your journey in both of those places. Next step. But some people wanting to come up, the unjust, if they haven't paid their penalty, then this opening turns into a deadly mouth. And as they approach it, it closes. And since they haven't paid their penalty, a certain number of very strong things come along and hurl them down into Tartarus until they finish their penalty. So especially the incurable, when they're seen, then they're pushed down into Tartarus, which is that conic section that runs all the way down into Hades and heaven. So they go down and descend into the deepest part of Tartarus. And equally well, those that lived a good life, of course, it's opened up and it smiles and it allows access into that great meadow. In the meadow then they spend 7 days, each group is there for that period of time, and on the 8th they rise and they make a journey, 4 days journeying now, to a shaft of light, pure light, brilliant. And it runs through the entire universe. So this now is going to run through everything, all the heavens, everything, this shaft of pure light. From its extremities, there is something else that takes place. It's called the light. The most central part of it is called the light of the girdle of the heavens. It really holds everything together. It holds the universe together. It is the basic construction of the triremes, the great battleships in those days built by the Greeks. It's that central piece that's put in there which everything joins to it. Now this thing runs through it, of course. Now that's really interesting. The name is the spindle of necessity. Now I like this word because this is going to play a major role. Necessity, fated necessity. Because we have to see how much of this is really mechanical. Now, around this, of course, the spindle of necessity, are the orbits of the planets. And he gives a description of each one of the planets and the relative distances from each one. And the way in which it moves creates this curious feature which he talks about as a series of boxes that you can put one into another, much like those Russian dolls. That's it. That's the way it is. And through the whole thing is this most brilliant of all lights, which then fixes everything together, and so it rotates, it revolves. Now, what turns it around? What turns it around? Well, first the whirl. The whole thing turns, spins, and their colors, and their magnificent colors, and it turns the whole thing. The spindle is turned on the knees of necessity. All right, so we have to have necessity in here. And with my art, we won't have any trouble at all. All right? So here's necessity. And there you can see are her knees. All right? And the spindle, therefore, right, the spindle is turned. The spindle is turned on the knees of necessity. Each one of those rims, of course, I should have mentioned it before, but above the rims there's a siren that sits and sings one note, one beautiful note, as the whole thing spins around and around and around.
Does this take the place of the sun then?
It would be. The only difficulty, that's one of the big problems in reading Plato. You see, if you get into the Timaeus, it appears that if you go through the mathematics, people who are expert in this field say that the only way he could have constructed that was with the heliocentric hypothesis, not the geocentric theory.
Right.
And the man who did this is a man by the name of Tailleferro, who was a very fine mathematician, philosopher. And he gave a proof. And it matches some of the old stories among the Greeks that the idea was out that the sun was the center of our solar system, and people would chase the people who believed it down the street and throw cabbages and everything else at them because they thought they were crazy.
Yeah.
Because after all, everyone can see the sun going down. You can go down the beach and you can watch it going down. You ever see that?
Sure.
I mean, you can't be mistaken about something that big. I mean, if you like evidence, physical evidence. So, yes, that raises that issue. So let me just acknowledge that and go on. Right? Now, from each of these 8 that spin, there's a whirl, and a sound is produced. So one note comes from the siren, and each of these produce a note, and that's called the harmony of the spheres. Right, because as they're turning around, each one has a note, and the siren, which is over the whole thing, of course, is in one beautiful note. So the whole concord is a harmony. So the whole universe is a harmony. Beautiful. Now, they are three daughters of necessity, and these are sometimes called the fates. And so here, of course, is necessity, and now we need three daughters. By heavens, I happen to be good at drawing women. Each one so beautiful it astonishes those people who observe them, right? But when you have talent, you have to show it. So there's the three of them, right? Of course, you know them. Lachesis, which is the fate of what is past, right? Clotho, the present, and Atropos, of course, is the future. Each sings in unison with the sirens, and they all turn the spheres, and that's what makes the entire universe move with such beauty and sound. Laches, however, now plays another role, major role. Laches, we will put here. Lachesis, sometimes they call her, right? And she has on her lap, right, all of the patterns that men may choose to determine their next life, and what are called lots. Because there's so many people going to be reborn, that they have to be given a time in which to make their choices. So if they distribute lots, you look at your number, oh, you're in the fifth lot, then you have to wait for the fifth group to make the choice of what kind of life you're going to live. So therefore, it's a combination of patterns and lots. Now, what's interesting, of course, is there's a prophet. And we'll make a prophet here. And he chooses those, he takes those, and he then distributes them. First, just the lots, he distributes the lots, and they fall just about where each soul is, so you don't have to do much, just reach and pick it up. And what's important about that is the statement Plato makes. He says, look here, she says, now this is her, this is Lachesis says, no divinity shall cast lots for you. You choose your own deity. Deity, remember, we're going to use that term later in another way. To whom falls the first lot, select a life to which you shall cleave of necessity. Right? So, look here. You pick up your lot. Now you can choose which lot, the patterns. And you cleave to that of necessity. So if in this beautiful picture, of course, you can see a soul. Right? And if he chooses, he gets that lot. He waits for his time to choose one of these patterns. He chooses the pattern. Now, this is most interesting, you see, because now you shall cleave of necessity to that choice that you made at that time. No change. It gets worse. And now the Laches says, the blame is on him who chooses, because the choice of a different life inevitably determines a different character. Your character comes from the choice you made of that life. That's how you get your character. So the pattern, that becomes a particular life you choose. That life you choose determines what kind of a character you have. Fixed. And then she says, look here, even if you were to if you were in the last lot, and if you had to make your choice of what kinds of patterns you're going to choose for your next life, even if it's the last, Plato says, if you choose wisely and live strenuously, then there's reserved for him an acceptable life, not an evil one. What do you need? Wisdom to choose, right? Even if last, if he chooses wisely and lives strenuously, that's a very, very important point. And matter of fact, we should have spent a little more time last week when we did the Phaedo on this idea of strength. He has two ideas, you see. He says that the reason man's condition is so terrible, the reason why man is in such a terrible condition, has nothing to do with good or evil. It has to do with two things. He is sluggish. That's his problem. Nature, man's sluggish. And weak. Feeble, he calls it feeble. Translation is feeble, but it's weak. Weakness. He doesn't have sufficient strength. That's man's problem. Now, sluggish means not that you can't move, but that there's a very low rate of change. Right? Now, equally well, you have to have a certain degree of strength in order to play this philosophical game. Why? Last time we spoke about the fact that the most interesting thing about the nature of reality is that it is beauty itself. It is ultimate reality. And you need strength to endure that experience. You simply need strength to endure that experience. You have to get it. If you don't have the strength, then you're not going to be able to endure more profound experiences. Sluggishness. If you stick to the where you are, if you're fixed in the life you have chosen, if you're satisfied where you are, you're a slug. Right? You're incapable of movement. It's too difficult to move. Right? When you ever have to try to break through and try to live more meaningfully, the first thing you recognize is that all your vows are difficult to make. I mean, not difficult to make, difficult to keep. Right? We're sluggish. Somehow we're pulled back by some strange psychic gravity to stay in the condition we've been in. So there are two things you need for this philosophical and psychic growth. You need strength, and you need a certain kind of strength that will propel you and allow you to make these kinds of transitions into more meaningful ways of life. That's why when we talked about last time, there's a kind of yoga that takes place in the Phaedo that we talked about in the afterworld. So I just wanted to mention that now and keep on going. All right? Okay. Now, therefore, if the person chooses wisely and lives strenuously, if they have the strength, then they can grow. You need psychic strength, and that's why, of course, there are the yogis and the Bhastika and the Kumbhakas and all the yoga breathing exercises, which we saw last week, matches one of those interesting states that is in the myth of the Phaedo. All right. Now here's the problem. Here is the problem. All right, so this is all background. Let's get the problem out. Where does all the evil, all the disasters, all the cruelty, all the inhumanity of man against man, where does it come from? What's its origin? What's its origin? Why is it? Now we're back to that idea of the two openings in the heavens and two openings down into Hades. All right, and here is the place of judgment, and from that, of course, we know that also some of those also go to the meadow to await rebirth. Now, he has a very interesting idea. Now, watch this now. Here are the souls coming back from heaven, pure now, right? Purified, and so they come return, time now for rebirth. Now, among the people here who have died, there are many men who have committed great and terrible deeds, great, terrible deeds, monstrous deeds. What was their background that produced such characters? He said, oh, the majority of them come just from one place. He said, they come from heaven. He said, they come from heaven. They come from, you see, they previously, to get there, previously they had to have a well-ordered life. Right? They had to have virtue to get up there, to spend, right, to travel around in the heavens. Right? They needed virtue, and it had to be by habit. Right, second nature habit. And therefore, during this journey up here, they were inexperienced with suffering. And therefore, you see, they got this state, a well-ordered state, and they got the kind of virtue that allowed them to gain access into heaven, but without philosophy. That's what he says, without philosophy.
So that's back to that sluggishness again.
Goes back to the punishment. Yeah. Without philosophy. He says, now he mentions one person that they knew, and he talks about how terrible a life he lived. And he says, well, there's nothing peculiar about that. He said, because this is just a kind of psychic balance of rewards and punishments. You just come back, you lived a terrible life last time, they get a good life this time. It's the wheel. It's the wheel. Right? It's the wheel.
So then you go down into Hades, and you come back
Yeah.
and make the transition.
Yeah, and he says, hey, all the tyrants were previously in the heavens.
That's right.
He said, because when you take a look at them, he said, notice what kind of people they are. They have to be very clever, they have to have good memories, they have to have good thinking, they have to have courage, they have to take all kinds of risks. They're the ideal type of man. They just chose the wrong life. Well, if they had all of those good qualities, where did they get them from? They must have then brought them with them from a higher life. The only problem was they chose the wrong kind of life with the qualities that they brought with them. So he says, look, the majority of those who are in this class of people that lived very wicked lives were those, therefore, who were caught without philosophy. Now, what does that mean? Let's go see if we can get it a little better. What is he saying? He's saying, those people, you see, we might expect that those people coming back up from Hades may not have been purified. There may have been some residue of something they really hadn't paid off. No, they come, the worst of us come from the heavens, not from unfinished consequences of Hades. Therefore, suffering doesn't provide a basis for choice. And he wants to make this point very strong. He said, because there are many people, these are the wicked. He said, let's look at another group. Those who have suffered greatly. All right, here they are. Now he's and is speaking at this point, and he says, it's a strange, pitiful, and ridiculous spectacle to see what happens to these people who have suffered so much in their past life. Because when they reach out to pick a new life, they're guided by their suffering. They want to avoid suffering. And in that choice, they pick the worst life, or empty lives, or stupid lives. He said, and I have a couple of good quotes, perhaps I can give you one or two just to have some fun. And this is a section that goes from Orpheus to Odysseus. So he mentions all kinds of people. And Orpheus is real good. He's got a good one for Orpheus. saw the soul that had been Orpheus's selecting the life of a swan, because from hatred of the tribe of women, owing to his death at their hands, he was unwilling to be conceived and born of a woman. Therefore he chose a swan. Then he saw the soul of Thamyris choosing the life of a nightingale. And he saw a swan changing to the choice of life of man. Ajax, the son of Telamon, because the soul remembered the adjudication of the arms of Achilles, was unwilling to become a man. She chose the life of a lion. The soul of Agamemnon, likewise from the hatred of the human race because of its sufferings, chose the life of an eagle. They're all ridiculous. Oh, ridiculous. Pitiful. Because they don't understand something, and that's what we have to figure out. Now, Odysseus is one of the great examples. So let me just, Odysseus. He says, Odysseus, it fell out that the soul of Odysseus drew the last lot. And he came to make his choice. And from his memory of former toils, having flung away ambition, he went about for a long time in quest of the life of an ordinary citizen who minded his own business. He found it with difficulty, lying in some corner disregarded by the others. But upon seeing it, he said, would have been the same had I drawn the first lot. And he chose it gladly. And the life of a private man, right, living simply, that's the best life. So, now what does this mean? It means we cannot make rational choices here. Odysseus did. He's the only one in the whole story of the myth of Er who did. So taken, therefore, as a whole, we do not make rational choices when we choose our next life. Right, we're incapable of making a rational choice. Unless we're someone like Odysseus. Wait a minute. All the experiences of heaven don't keep you from selecting in your next life the kind of a choice where you may end up as a tyrant and then suffer immensely more. Spending all of that time in Hades and then coming back and being judged again and going through all of this chaos and choosing another life. And so the cycle goes on and on and on. Well, once you get, now we're going to see whether we can accent the problem now. Once you get your particular lot that allows you to make your choice, and after going around, if you choose the particular lot you have, then Laches seals it in. They go before Lachesis again, and she seals it. And she sends a guardian. Now this is most interesting. Look here. She sends a guardian with each soul, kind of a guardian angel, but a peculiar one. Because it's going to be a guardian of the life you chose. Wait a minute, what does that mean?
Keep you true to your choice.
That's right. That guardian is going to make sure you go after the choice you made. Therefore, the guardian is the fulfiller of the choice. So there's something within us when you're born. You make a stupid choice, and there's this guardian that's going to say, okay, you chose it, and you're going to be it. I'd like to change. That's my job to make your job. And so the spindle of necessity is spun to ratify the destiny of both the lot and the choice, and to make what he calls the web of its destiny irreversible. Now, that's not a very comforting vision, is it? Now, how did Odysseus get? He's the only one who made a rational choice. Well, thank goodness there's another page. This is really curious, you see, because he now has this doctrine of the mean. And he says, you know, the problem is that whether you go here or you go here in Hades, whichever one you go to, or your present life, there's only one real problem. And that is in every situation you're in, either in heaven, Hades, your present life, you must in every situation choose the better from the worst. And you choose the better, that's the just life. Always choose the middle, right? You don't want to go two extremes, because the just life is a mean. It's keeping away from the extremes. In that sense, it's very Buddhist in that sense, isn't it? So that the mean is the ethical choice. Because, you see, you can experience these things here intensely, and it doesn't bring about any value in your judgment. It doesn't change your judgment. It doesn't make your judgment any better. It doesn't make it any more profound. The suffering that you've gone through doesn't help you make any decisions when you now have to choose your next life. Well, what does? Huh? All right. There's another guide.
Can I ask questions as we go along?
Sure,
Save it
sure,
for the
sure,
end.
sure.
From what you just had, the page before that, from what I understood about choosing the better life or the just life in
Yeah.
terms of making your choices, so if you make a choice that's it's somehow
Wherever you are.
mediocre, it sounded
Yeah.
like to me, mediocre, then how do you merit?
In between, you mean, might be
Yeah,
mediocre?
Then how do you
Oh.
merit that you're going to, rise above what you've been given? Or is that not necessary to do? Then you fall into, it seems to me, then you fall back into that sluggishness of not,
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of propelling yourself to do more.
You're quite right. But now use that same logic and see whether it would equally follow for pleasure and pain. If you had to choose between these, all right?
The goal would be to have good judgment.
And take the one in between, both. That's what he's saying. But let's see if we can take a look at this again. All right. There's another guide. There's an entirely other guide that's outside of the myth. Though there is a feature in it, outside of it, at the end of the dialogue. Socrates then comes back after telling the story. And I'd like to go to what he says and then go back into the myth to another part. Okay, let's go back into the myth. Where did I put that great quote? I'm now going to read the last two sentences in the Republic. The third, let me put three in. And so Glaucon, who's the chap he's talking with in the Republic, the tale of was saved, as the saying is, and was not lost. And it will save us, if we believe it, and we shall safely cross the river Lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness, and keep our soul unspotted from the world. Now here it is. But if we are guided by me, we shall believe that the soul is immortal, capable of enduring all extremes of good and evil, And so we shall hold ever to the upward way, pursue righteousness with wisdom, always and ever, so that we may be dear to ourselves and to the gods, both during our sojourn here and when we receive our reward. But if we are guided by me, we shall believe the soul is immortal. Of course, that's what he tried to prove in the Republic and in the Phaedo. Capable of enduring all extremes. Capable of enduring all extremes. And so we shall hold ever to the upward way and pursue righteousness with wisdom. Well, where do you get the righteousness and wisdom in this story? Doesn't appear to be there. Well, I have an answer to that. I skipped it in order to have some fun. Okay, so let's see if we can get in there. He said, and now I'm going to push this a bit, all right? Because of the condition as described in the myth of Ur, there's an urgency. And the urgency is that you have to learn how to make proper choices. But there's nothing in the myth so far that can allow us to decide on how to make the better choice. Well, how do you make the better choice? He says you have to find someone. Right? You have to find someone, and in Southern California, it's often those people who drink cappuccino. Right? Because you want to be able to find someone who can give you, all right, give the person, the ability and knowledge to distinguish the good life from the bad. You have to find someone who can give you both the ability and the knowledge. Curious kind of knowledge. Right? It's the knowledge to distinguish the good life from the bad, obviously. Right? Right? To distinguish it. Always, everywhere, both now as well as hereafter. And the point is that we must always choose the best that the conditions allow. That's his standard. Wherever you are, you might find yourself in all kinds of strange situations and circumstances. Your problem is that you have to choose the best that the conditions allow for you. Condition. All right, now what do you have to do now? Let's assume that. Now, let's go get into it more fully. What kind of knowledge is it? This is a really curious kind of knowledge. He says you have to get someone who can do the following. The person has to know, right? He has to know, now over here is beauty. Now I'm putting down here the different kinds of experiences of beauty. And this person has to know what kind of beauty combines best with poverty and wealth. Combined with the habit of the soul. Combined with the habit of the soul. Especially as it operates for good and bad in your choices. You want to be able to talk to someone who can tell you how all of this is affected by high and low birth. Your past, your inheritance, where you were born, your culture that you brought with it, right? whether or not you take a private position in life or public, whether you're in the public or whether you have a private life, that's going to play a role. Most essential, of course, from what we said before, comes very important here. He has to know the degree of strength and weakness, the role it plays in this whole problem, right? Strength and weakness. And the role that, I could put it in many ways, but essentially a quick mind and dull. And that's the goal. That's what you have to do. And while you do all of this with him, you have to continuously, right, have one feature in mind, and that is you always have to have your eye on the issue of the nature of the soul. So, now let's go back. All right, let's take a look at it once more. There are many kinds of experiences of beauty. This person should be able to advise you, right, what kind of beauty combined with your condition of wealth or poverty, the kinds of habits you've developed in your soul, that is the way you live, that particular automatic ways of being, both when you do something good and when you don't. Another way of putting that, I don't like the habit of the soul. Let's see if we can change it a bit and say the habitual way of the soul's functioning, the way you function. Then the person should know the effect of a low birth, family background, right? Low birth, all the effects of a low birth, and equally well, the effects of a high birth in this quest. Have to know whether the person is living a private life or public life. You have to play that in, how much strength, how much weakness they have, how bright and how dull they are. This is curious, and while all of this is going on, you have to keep your eye on the nature of the soul. We got to straighten this out. Right, now that we have this, the method, let's look at it again. Is it likely that the habitual way in which you function brings you to certain things, certain ways of life that you can judge from your own background, leads you sometimes to what's good and what isn't? Would you agree that habitual way in which you function is also influenced by the amount of resources you have? That's not all you are. You came into the world with a whole background, your birth, your whole tradition. You can have a low birth, as it were, or a high birth. That in itself isn't enough. Then the life you choose to live, whether it's out in the public or private, is going to play a role. Your own strength and quickness of mind is going to play a role to determine what? What kind of beauty can best be mixed and can be combined with what kind of poverty and what kind of wealth or your resources that you have, right? With the habitual way in which you're functioning. So let's see whether we can draw a picture. We would expect this person then, presuppose there is someone who has this kind of knowledge, all right? Along comes you, all right? You have a quick mind, or you wouldn't be here tonight, all right? You have a certain degree of strength and weakness, whatever that is, all right? Let's kind of put a measure there, all right? A certain quantity of, let's call it quality of vitality. That's a better way to put it.
How about enthusiasm?
Oh, I'd put that in there with vitality. That's a good one to put in, right? All right, you come, right, and you have a certain degree, a quality of vitality about you. Right? Right, so you're right, quick mind, right? Therefore, you have a certain quality of strength and weakness, all right? If you have time to live a private life or you're out in the public, that's going to play a role. Because obviously, if you have a private life, you can do more introspection than you likely could with public, or you'd have to reserve a certain amount of time in order to do the reflective side if you did leave a public life. So let's say you have sufficient private time. Let's call it that. All right, you have sufficient private time. Then you can engage in what we're going to be doing. All right, now you're going to have to deal with your own past inheritance in terms of where you came from, your birth, your background. Right? That's going to play a role. And with it is going to be what you have developed as a habitual way of being. Right? So your personal way of being. Right? And with that, of course, wealth in one sense, as it's been mentioned sometimes, allows a certain time. You can exchange money for time. Right? Wealth, poverty. Because if you don't have enough money, you have to work. You have to use your time to buy. You have to use your time to buy substance to provide yourself with existence, and therefore money allows a certain degree of freedom if used wisely. All right. Now, there are all kinds of beauty. Let's go for the top, right, which he calls bliss. Therefore, this person, should be able to look at you and say, let's take a look at you now. Let's see. You have certain abilities, and this is the assessment of where you are. Right? And now he has to then be able to direct you to these kinds of beauty. We picked the highest one, bliss. And while you're going through this whole thing, your primary goal is always, while this is going on, this quest for this kind of knowledge, is to keep in mind the nature of your soul. So I could read you now a section and see if we did any damage to it. Okay. And whoever took up a lot saw plainly what number he had drawn. And after this again, the prophet placed the patterns of the lives before them on the ground, far more numerous than the assembly. They were of every variety, for there were lives of all kinds of animals and all sorts of human lives, for there were tyrannies among them, some uninterrupted till the end, others destroyed midway, and issuing in penuries and exiles and beggars. And there were lives of men of repute, for their forms of beauty and bodily strength, and prowess and high birth and virtues of their ancestors. Of course, the same thing for women. But there was no determination of the quality of soul, because the choice of a different life inevitably determined a different character. But all other things were commingled with one another: wealth, poverty, sickness, health, and all the intermediate conditions. And there, dear Glaucon, appears as the supreme hazard for a man. This is the chief reason why it should be our main concern that each of us, neglecting all other studies, should seek after and study this thing, if in any way he may be able to learn and to discover the man who will give him the ability and the knowledge to distinguish the life that is good from which is bad, always, everywhere, and to choose the best that the conditions allow, taking into account all the things which we have spoken, and estimating the effect of their goodness on this life, of their conjunction or their severance, to know how beauty commingled with poverty or wealth, and combined with what habit of soul operates for good or for evil, and what are the effects of high and low birth in private and public station and office, and the strength and weakness, and the quickness of apprehension and the dullness of all. And similar acquired habits of the soul when blended and combined with one another, so that with consideration of all these things he'll be able to make a reasoned choice between the better and the worse life, with his eyes fixed on the nature of his soul, naming the worse life that which will tend to make it more unjust, and the better that which will make it more just. And all other considerations he'll dismiss, for we've seen that this is the best choice both for life and in death. So a man must take with him to the house of death adamine faith in this, that even there he may be undazzled by the richnesses and the similar trumpery that may precipitate himself into tyrannies and similar doings, and so work many past evil. So that's where so look here. All of these points, then, each of these points, how to make these decisions, what it involves, is a subject in the Republic. Therefore, in the Republic, we have each one of these issues is discussed. Each one of these is given a certain area where Socrates explores it in a certain degree of depth. So he brings it all together in the myth of error, and he's saying, you know what you need? You need to find someone who knows the Republic and who can do it personally. Isn't that weird? I mean, isn't that strange? That's the way he ends it, right? That's what he's really doing. And therefore he says, he is one more. He's the second guide. Because your first guide makes sure you're going to do whatever it is you chose. And the only way out for him is this quest for using the mind to explore what it is you are. See, this is really telling you what you are. That's really what it is, isn't it? These are all the influences on your soul. You say, okay, now you know what? You got to know all that. Why? Because then if we're going to choose what kind of beauty you want to experience, each one of these things is going to play its role. And so in the end of this myth, Socrates says, if we are to be guided by me. So let me go back into that last couple of sentences. And he sneaked that in, right? But if we are guided by me, We shall believe the soul is immortal, capable of enduring all extremes, good and evil. And we shall hold ever to the upward way, pursue righteousness with wisdom, always, right, so that we may be dear to ourselves and to the gods, both during our sojourn here and when we receive our rewards in the next. He says, then he goes on and says, as the victors in games go about, gathering in their fame. And thus, both here and in that journey of 1,000 years, whereof I have told you, we shall fare well. And let's throw it open for some questions and play some with it. That's the whole myth of Earth. And this is really the subject of Plato's Republic, condensed, compacted into the end of his myth. Clever? Yeah, he's quite a guy. I know someone who read all of it. So what is it like being taken through this strange thing called the myth of Earth?
Just a comment. In studying Chinese medicine, the goal was to develop good judgment, so you ate accordingly to develop your mind to have good judgment. That's what the chief.
That's right. Same thing. Yeah. And here again, like as we mentioned in the Phaedo, strength is terribly significant. Ki, or whatever word you want to give for it, that psychic energy.
It follows through with your good judgment. You could have good judgment, but not the strength to.
But if you don't have the strength to.
Follows through with it. You're more judgment.
It's nice to think it, but you can't act on it.
Right.
Yeah. I enjoy it. So, yes? I like calling on her because occasionally she doesn't have anything to say. This is not too usual. So. All right, so what's the goal then? You have to find someone who can pull this stunt off. And that's going to be for him the study of philosophy. And where do the wicked men come from? Previously? Heaven. They were all good.
That's right. But we had no experience.
No.
We're good, but we hadn't earned it.
Yeah, that's right. We're good by habit,
Right.
but not by philosophy.
So
You didn't make conscious judgments. You just lived a well-ordered life because you lived a well-ordered life, but no reflection upon it.
Yeah, I have a question. Why is the soul habitual in the way it functions? Because the habitual implies that there's recall. So
There is recall?
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's always this recall with the recollection of what's happened in the past with the souls, and that's why it performs in a habitual way.
Let's make sure okay.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree there is such a thing, or you heard about it certainly, as an experience of bliss?
Mm-hmm.
All right. In order to reach that, is it possible that you're going to have to deal with the way in which you habitually function and the way you habitually try to seek some goal? Mm-hmm. That habitual way in which you function
Mm-hmm.
needs to be challenged because the way in which you function to reach that may not work.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to know what kind of beauty mingles with all of this to produce that. So you may in fact be quite successful in reaching certain goals here, here, but now when you use that same strategy to try to reach this, it may be inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Could partially be working with the pattern, within the pattern that you were given.
Mm-hmm. Keep going. You'd be
Or
working
with the
within
pattern that you had taken, still being forced by the first guide to maintain that pattern, but to utilize the pattern in a different means to attain a different goal.
Well, okay. Here, remember, the habitual way is what you came with.
Right. Yeah.
Because the particular pattern that you choose is going to give you the character that you have. So that's already established, yeah.
So in this area, going back to one of your other diagrams, where the judgment in that middle section, you know, that I kind of questioned about how you win, you know, or get merits from that midsection. So in that section, you're not erased from your habitual way of your soul functioning?
Yes, you are.
You are.
Because whatever happens to you, you pay it off, or you get rewards for the way in which your character expressed itself in your last life.
Okay, character, not
Yeah.
soul.
Pardon?
Character, you said, not soul.
Well, the character of the soul, one's character.
Okay.
But doesn't that nature in turn influence your decision then, as to where you go in the next?
Well, I think the thing we're asking is, when they meet here in the meadow, because that's the meadow of rebirth, because this is the arena where they are then sent to various places, right?
Right, yeah.
Right. But those then that came up and have paid their dues, and those that have come down and received their rewards, they then journey to this meadow for 4 days, and that's the group we're now talking about. Okay.
Right.
So, okay, could you express it in terms of that then? Could you express the point you had in terms of those in the meadow?
No, I had forgotten about the meadow.
Yeah, okay.
So that was-
See,
that
in a way,
clarifies
this is,
it.
as it were, this is curious, very indeed curious, because this suggests, does it not, that it's a clean bill, a clean slate. And you pick up your character from the choice you make for your next reincarnation.
Right, from the three,
But while that's true, you know, when I say true, I mean it's in the book, when he talks about that spectacle, that pitiful spectacle of watching people choose their next birth, they are still influenced by their prior existence. So it has both sides, you see. It has both sides, to be
that's
fair with the
also-
story.
That also
Yeah,
clarifies
yeah.
what I said about habitual.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, there's a point of view that before we're born, we're experiencing this bliss. But then in order to operate in the world, we forget that bliss because we have to function in the world.
And we're in this
So the
soul
bliss is
state.
always there in our memory.
Yeah.
So we know what bliss is from our memory.
Sure.
So we're trying to achieve a way to return to that
Oh,
state.
definitely.
But sometimes we miss it because we make some wrong choices. We get
And
caught
wouldn't you
up.
agree what we're looking for, we should put, I think it maybe in the penny saver is the right place to put it. An ad that might read, if you have skill in helping those people who have achieved certain degrees of bliss and beauty, but are having difficulty entering it once again and perhaps more fully than they had in the past, right, we would appreciate you calling, and then we'll have an 800 number. Right?
Or get on the internet.
Right, internet, right, we'll put it out there, won't we? Email it, you're right. Right. Web it out.
Yeah, the World Web.
Right, won't take long. Then we'll have a whole bunch of applicants, and we can easily test how good they are, because we need their art.
Yeah.
Right, that's the right way to do it. Modern communication and Plato come together. But these are the things that we bring with us for that judgment. And so we need someone who can pass on to us both the ability and the knowledge to make that entree into pure beauty.
Sorry to make this so mundane,
Huh?
going back again. So I'm assuming then the guide changes with each rebirth, because the guide is there specifically for the lot that you chose.
That's right.
So when you
guarantees
fulfill,
it, necessity.
right?
That's
so,
right.
So when that's fulfilled, it's good riddance to guide, and you get a new one.
And the new one would be Socrates.
You're right.
And you know what happened to him, so be careful. Yeah, you see, with all of this necessity, all this determinism, he's saying that there's only one thing that breaks through it all, and that's philosophy. Because otherwise you just keep coming back and back. And you may even get wonderful rewards for all the good you've done, but if it wasn't through consciously using your mind, well, you come back again next time, it'll probably be a tyrant.
Right.
which is very
What
interesting.
about conformism, with at least bringing it up to date where at least in modern theology or modern Christianity, all you have to do is just give the outward expression of
Yeah,
divinity,
that's right,
belief in
that's
one,
right.
Yeah, it's a cheap
belief in
shot.
divinity and Jesus or whomever,
Yeah.
and you are saved.
Yeah, this this doesn't work. Belief gets nowhere with this, does it?
Yeah, really.
Oh.
Tenfold of pleasure, but then the tyrant next trip.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, there was a point earlier where I was thinking about that. Where does intention lie in all of this?
The tension?
Intention.
Intention.
Mhm.
The intention of the myth?
No, intention of one's consciousness, let's say.
Could you put it in other words? The intention of
Yeah,
one's consciousness? Yeah.
like what this lady was referring to. She's kind of
Yeah.
like saying, working it from the
I
outside,
see,
and
I
I'm
see,
talking about working
I
it through
see.
the
Yeah,
internal,
yeah.
outwardly to express.
This is a terrible system. You get nothing for your good intentions.
It has to be conscious.
It's a terrible system. It's like in school, students come up and they say, well, how much do you give for effort? You look and they say, nothing.
Well,
I really worked hard, you say, yeah.
that's right.
Nothing.
Some people get A's without any effort, and people
Right.
work their butt off, and all they get is a
Yeah.
D. I've had that happen.
Yeah. Intention, good intentions, nothing. Doesn't play a role.
Okay.
Well, the thing is that Christians miss the point of Jesus' teaching, because when people asked him about the kingdom of God, he said, where are they finding? He says, well, people will look here and there, they look all over, he says. But they're going to miss it, because he says the last place they'll look is within themselves. He made that point.
And Socrates would whisper in his ear, you going to do it by philosophy or not?
Yeah.
That's why Paul said, what does Jerusalem have to do with Athens?
Right.
Right? Nothing.
That's what bothered me about this belief systems. I was wondering, how could this intelligent being be so stupid as to be taken in by our belief systems? Belief systems are like trying to buy your way in.
Yeah.
It's another way of buying and selling.
Yeah.
If I believe so and so, then I'm going to get a certain reward.
Oh, quite true. There was that chap who, the great wager, Pascal's wager.
Yeah.
He said, when you look at what you win by believing against what you lose by not believing, he said, consider it as a wager. Think of the odds. You think of how much you may win, but belief isn't much. Get all of that, it's foolish not to believe. Of course, what that does to the idea of faith and belief is cruel, but some people take it that way. I'm glad I don't have that problem. Let's see if I can. I'd like to just read that one section where he's talking to where reveals the purpose. When he, drew near to this embarkation where people would then be assigned up or down, he was told that he must be the messenger to mankind, to tell them of that other world. And they charged him to give ear and to observe everything in that place. So you can go through the myth of and look for each time he says he saw something and observed something and what was said, and you can just note it, and these are the kinds of comments that he brought back with him. And that's for the structure of the myth. But I want to deal with one more thing. There's a curious problem. I'd like to raise it. It's not enough then to experience in the heavens the highest kind of beauty. It's not enough. Look, let me give you a section. They're now in the meadow, where those that have come up from Hades and those that have come down are together, and they're comparing stories and telling one another about their journeys. And they told their stories to one another, the one lamenting and wailing as they recalled how many and how dreadful things they had suffered and seen in their journey beneath the earth. Last 1,000 years. While those from heaven related their delights and visions of beauty beyond words. So you see, you can experience these visions of beauty, and that's not sufficient. You have to come through it through the mind. Because you can have it, right, and then come back as a tyrant. Because if you have the vision, it's because you did some good and you're now rewarded.
Because that happened to me. I remember in one of my past lives, I was very blissful.
Yeah.
Then the next life, I turned into a tyrant, a real jerk.
We'll ask you to write a commentary to this. From my reflections on my past lives, I can give support to Plato's doctrine and the myth of error. Yeah. That's what he's saying. That cycle, that circle of life and death.
Joseph Campbell said in his interview with Phil Moyers about a lot of bliss is lost in the transition of the spoken word.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought of that as you read that passage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meaning that I think
Interesting
that
guy,
somehow,
Joseph
that, yeah,
Campbell.
that somehow
Pardon me?
that language, although we use it as a means to
Mhm.
sort of like identify things, it sometimes loses its potency in terms
right.
of experience.
That's right.
As soon as you start thinking about your bliss, you lose it.
That'll do it.
Because bliss is beyond
Oh,
thought.
I'm having a good time. What did you say? Are you doing it or talking about it? Yes, I'm talking about it. There it goes. Yeah. Yeah. Don't remind yourself what you know.
Bliss is
You
living-
don't need it.
Bliss is living in the present, and thought is living in the past. So as soon as you're...
Well, good, good. I enjoyed going through it.
Yeah, it's very
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, your attendance. Yeah.